Get out! This isn't your home anymore. When my daughter-in-law screamed those words as I stood in the kitchen I had cooked in for 43 years, something inside me shattered that could never be repaired. But what Victoria didn't realize was that throughout my 7 decades of life, I had learned that quiet preparation often speaks louder than loud demands. And within 6 months, the woman who had thrown me out of my family home would discover exactly who really held the keys to her future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and at 73 years old, I've learned that some people mistake kindness for weakness until life teaches them the difference. For over 4 decades, I worked as a commercial real estate appraiser in the bustling city of Millbrook Heights, eventually becoming one of the most respected property evaluators in the Tri-County area. I helped banks, investors, and developers understand the true value of buildings, land, and commercial properties, developing an eye for hidden potential that others often overlooked. Throughout my professional career, I became known for my meticulous attention to detail and my ability to see value where others saw only problems. I worked on landmark assessments that determined the fate of historic buildings, helped small businesses secure fair property valuations for crucial loans, and consulted on commercial developments that shaped Millbrook Heights' downtown revitalization. My expertise extended beyond simple appraisals. I understood zoning laws, development potential, market timing, and the intricate web of ownership, financing, and regulatory factors that determined true property value. Eleanor doesn't just see what is, my colleague Robert Chen used to say during our monthly Appraisers Association meetings. She sees what could be. That's why banks trust her assessments above all others in the region. This reputation for seeing hidden potential would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined, though not in ways my professional peers would ever expect. My late husband, Thomas, and I had built our life together in a magnificent Victorian home at 412 Maple Grove Lane, a house we purchased as newlyweds in 1972 for $28,000, which seemed like an enormous sum at the time, but was actually the investment opportunity of a lifetime. Thomas was a high school principal with a gentle heart and unwavering belief in treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their background or circumstances. Together, we created a home filled with love, laughter, intellectual curiosity, and the kind of deep stability that becomes the foundation for everything meaningful that follows. The house itself was a treasure, built in 1898 by the original town mayor, featuring original hardwood floors, hand-carved crown molding, a wraparound porch supported by elegant columns and leaded glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across our morning coffee table. The lot was substantial, nearly half an acre in what had become the heart of Millbrook Heights' most desirable historic district. Thomas and I spent decades lovingly restoring original details while carefully modernizing systems, creating a perfect blend of historic charm and contemporary comfort. A home isn't just where you live, Thomas used to say as we worked together in our carefully planned garden each evening, tending to the heirloom roses he had planted for our 5th anniversary. It's where you build your legacy, where your values take root and grow, where the next generation learns what really matters in life. Those weren't just pretty words to Thomas. They reflected his deep philosophy about the relationship between place and character. He believed that the care we put into our physical environment reflected and shaped our internal values. Every restoration project we undertook together, from refinishing the original oak staircase to carefully selecting period-appropriate fixtures, was an investment not just in property value, but in creating a space that embodied our commitment to quality, craftsmanship, and respect for history. Our son Michael was born 2 years after we bought the house, and from his earliest days, he absorbed both Thomas's compassionate wisdom and my analytical precision. We raised him to value both hard work and kindness, to understand that success means little if it comes at the expense of others' dignity or well-being. Michael was the kind of child who excelled academically while also volunteering at the local food bank, who could solve complex mathematics problems and show genuine empathy for classmates struggling with their homework. "He has your business, sense, and my heart for people," Thomas would often say proudly as we watched Michael grow into a young man who could both create sophisticated investment strategies and show genuine care for his clients' financial dreams and fears. That combination will serve him well in a world that too often separates intellectual capability from emotional intelligence. Michael's childhood was spent exploring every corner of our Victorian home, reading in the tower room during summer, afternoons, helping Thomas with carpentry projects in the basement workshop, assisting me with my property research by carefully organizing files and learning to read architectural drawings. He understood from an early age that our house was more than just a building. It was a legacy of careful stewardship, a testament to what was possible when people invested not just money, but love, attention, and respect into their environment. After earning a scholarship to Millbrook University, Michael studied finance and economics, while also taking courses in social work and community development. His senior thesis examined how financial planning could be used as a tool for social equity, helping working families build generational wealth rather than simply serving already wealthy clients who wanted to become wealthier. The paper earned academic recognition and reflected the values Thomas and I had tried to instill, that professional skills should serve a broader purpose than personal enrichment alone. Michael's early career reflected these principles. Rather than joining a large financial services firm focused exclusively on high-net-worth clients, he started his own practice specializing in comprehensive financial planning for middle-class families, first-time homebuyers, and small business owners. His approach was thorough, patient, and educational. He didn't just manage money, but taught his clients to understand their own financial situations and make informed decisions about their futures. When Thomas passed away suddenly from a heart attack 8 years ago, the loss was absolutely devastating. We had been true partners in every sense for 45 years, building not just a marriage, but a complete shared life based on mutual respect, complementary strengths, and unified values. The house we had filled with stimulating conversation and shared dreams suddenly felt impossibly quiet. The garden we had tended together as our evening ritual began to show signs of my inconsistent care as I struggled to maintain routines that had been designed for two people working in harmony. The grief was physical, a constant pressure in my chest that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. Thomas and I had planned to spend our retirement years traveling to historic properties across Europe, studying architectural preservation techniques we might apply to our own home, and sharing our knowledge with other preservation enthusiasts. Instead, I found myself alone at 65, facing a future very different from everything we had envisioned together. During those dark months, Michael provided unwavering support that went far beyond dutiful obligation or social expectation. He visited daily, not just to check on my physical well-being, but to engage with my grief authentically. He helped with household maintenance tasks that required physical strength I could no longer safely manage alone, arranged for reliable contractors when specialized work was needed, and made sure I remained connected to friends, community activities, and professional associations when isolation seemed easier than engagement. Dad would want us to honor his memory by living fully, Michael reminded me gently when I hesitated to accept an invitation to rejoin the Historic Preservation Society's monthly lectures. Not by moving on quickly or pretending the loss doesn't matter, but by continuing to embrace the values you shared together and the work that brought you both meaning. This wisdom, understanding the difference between healthy grieving and self-destructive withdrawal, reflected the emotional intelligence Thomas and I had tried to cultivate in our son. Michael didn't try to rush my healing process or suggest that staying busy would solve my grief, but he also didn't allow me to disappear entirely from the life Thomas and I had built together. When Michael met Victoria Ashford 3 years after his father's death, I was genuinely happy for him. After witnessing firsthand the depth of loss that comes when a true partnership ends, seeing my son open himself to new love felt like watching Thomas's philosophy about resilience and hope in action. Our family had always believed in the healing, power of authentic connection, and Michael's ability to love again after losing his father seemed like the healthiest possible response to experiencing profound loss. Victoria worked as a senior marketing director for Prestige Property Group, one of Millbrook Heights' most successful luxury real estate firms, specializing in properties valued above $500,000. She was undeniably striking, tall and polished, with platinum blonde hair always styled perfectly, and the kind of commanding presence that drew attention in any room. Her designer clothes, expensive accessories, and articulate discussion of high-end real estate markets initially impressed both Michael and me, suggesting sophistication and professional competence. She understands the property market from the luxury sales side, Michael explained enthusiastically after their first few dates, his excitement evident in a way I hadn't seen since before Thomas's death. She's working with clients who are buying million-dollar homes, investment properties, commercial developments. We have fascinating conversations about market trends, investment strategies, and the psychological factors that influence high-value purchasing decisions. During their early courtship, Victoria was charming and engaging during family gatherings. She asked thoughtful questions about my appraisal work, expressed appreciation for our home's historic features, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about our family's history and values. She complimented Thomas's restoration work throughout the house, showing knowledge of Victorian architectural details that suggested both professional expertise and personal appreciation for craftsmanship. If I occasionally noticed a calculating quality in her questions about our family's assets, the specific value of our Maple Grove property, or the details of my retirement financial planning, I initially dismissed my concerns as professional paranoia. As a property appraiser who had spent decades working with people motivated primarily by financial opportunity, I had perhaps become too accustomed to recognizing mercenary motives where simpler explanations might suffice. She seems genuinely interested in understanding our family, I told myself after one dinner where Victoria had asked detailed questions about Thomas's pension, my professional retirement benefits, and the investment strategies we had used throughout our marriage. Not everyone approaches relationships with ulterior motives. Maybe I'm projecting professional skepticism onto an innocent situation. When Michael announced their engagement after just 10 months of dating, I expressed mild reservations only once, gently suggesting they might benefit from a longer courtship period to truly understand each other's fundamental values, life goals, and approaches to important decisions like family relationships, financial priorities, and long-term planning. Mom, she makes me happy in ways I didn't think were possible after losing Dad, Michael told me, his eyes bright with a certainty I hadn't seen since before Thomas's death. After watching what you and Dad had, that incredible partnership built on mutual respect and shared values, I know what real love looks like. Victoria and I complement each other perfectly. Her marketing expertise and business connections, combined with my financial planning skills and client relationships, we're building something really strong together. Those words reassured me that despite my occasional unease about Victoria's focus on financial matters, Michael recognized in her the potential for the kind of mutual support and intellectual partnership that had characterized my relationship with Thomas. When they married in an elaborate ceremony at the exclusive Millbrook Country Club, a venue Victoria insisted was essential for networking with high-net-worth clients and establishing our professional credibility in the luxury market, I embraced her as my daughter-in-law with cautious optimism and genuine hope for their happiness. "Welcome to our family," I told her sincerely at the reception, offering her a delicate pearl and sapphire necklace that had belonged to my mother as a traditional wedding gift passed down through 3 generations. "I hope you'll find as much happiness and fulfillment with Michael as I found with Thomas." Her response was gracious but revealing in retrospect. "Thank you, Eleanor. I'm sure Michael and I will build something even more valuable and impressive together than what previous generations achieved. Not happiness, love, or fulfillment, but something valuable and impressive. An achievement to be measured rather than a relationship to be treasured." The first 2 years of their marriage seemed to validate Michael's confidence in their partnership and shared vision. Victoria's career flourished as Millbrook Heights experienced an unprecedented luxury real estate boom, with wealthy buyers from larger cities discovering our community's combination of historic charm, excellent schools, and reasonable proximity to major metropolitan areas. Her commissions from high-end sales allowed them to purchase an impressive modern home in Willowbrook Estates, the city's most exclusive new development, featuring contemporary architecture, premium finishes, and amenities like a 3-car garage, wine cellar, and home theater system. Michael's financial planning practice expanded dramatically as well, serving many of the same affluent clients Victoria worked with in real estate transactions. Their professional synergy seemed perfect. Victoria would help wealthy clients find and purchase luxury properties, then refer them to Michael for comprehensive financial planning services, including investment management, tax optimization, and estate planning. Their combined income quickly exceeded anything either had achieved individually, and their social media presence showcased a lifestyle of expensive vacations, exclusive cultural events, charity galas, and material success that seemed to confirm they were living their absolute best life together. They appeared to be the perfect power couple, professionally successful, financially secure, socially connected, and completely aligned in their ambitions for continued upward mobility. Their Christmas cards featured professional photographs of them in designer clothes standing in front of their impressive modern home, and their social media accounts documented expensive dinner parties, weekend trips to exclusive resorts, and networking events with other successful young professionals. However, during this same period, my relationship with Victoria gradually but noticeably shifted from warm acceptance to increasingly polite distance. What had initially been genuine, efforts to include me in their social life became perfunctory and obligation-driven. Holiday invitations became rare and conditional, family dinners dwindled from monthly to quarterly occurrences, and conversations during our limited interactions increasingly focused on Victoria's professional achievements, expensive purchases, and social connections rather than family relationships or shared experiences. Victoria believes it's important for us to establish our independence as a couple, Michael explained when I asked why they hadn't included me in their Thanksgiving plans, the first holiday I would spend entirely alone since Thomas's death. She thinks too much family involvement can create dependency patterns that aren't healthy for a marriage, especially when we're working so hard to build our professional reputation and social standing in the community. This philosophy, directly contradicting the integrated multi-generational family approach that Thomas and I had modeled and Michael had always valued, was an early warning sign I deeply regret not addressing more directly and persistently. For our family, relationships had always been the foundation upon which other aspects of life were built, not obstacles to be managed for optimal personal advancement or potential sources of social embarrassment. More troubling than the reduced frequency of our interactions was the subtle but unmistakable change in Michael's demeanor during our increasingly rare visits. The confident, articulate young man who had once spoken passionately about helping his clients achieve their financial dreams and build security for their families began consistently deferring to Victoria's opinions and priorities. Conversations that once ranged freely across topics from philosophy to current events, from family memories to professional challenges, became narrowly focused on business metrics, material acquisitions, and social positioning. Victoria's absolutely right that we need to think bigger and more strategically, he would tell me, using phrases and perspectives that didn't sound like his natural voice or reflect his historical values. The clients we're attracting now require a different level of sophistication in our lifestyle and professional presentation. We can't afford to appear small town or unsophisticated when we're competing for high net worth clients who have options. During one particularly telling Christmas dinner at their Willowbrook home, to which I had been invited primarily because Michael insisted, despite Victoria's obvious reluctance and repeated suggestions that holidays should be intimate couple time, I observed a troubling interaction that crystallized my growing concerns about the direction of their relationship and Michael's apparent transformation. Michael had been sharing a story about helping a young immigrant family secure financing for their first home purchase, his voice warming with genuine pleasure as he described their emotional reaction to achieving homeownership, despite significant language barriers and limited credit history. It was exactly the kind of meaningful, service-oriented work that had always motivated him and reflected the values Thomas and I had tried to instill. Honestly, Michael, Victoria interrupted with sharp irritation barely concealed beneath a veneer of reasonable concern, you really need to stop taking on these small, time-intensive clients who barely generate enough commission to cover your overhead costs. The emotional satisfaction you get from these projects is nice, but it creates the wrong impression with our more valuable contacts and potential referral sources. We should be focusing exclusively on high-net-worth individuals who can provide meaningful referrals to others in their income bracket. This dismissal of the very work that gave Michael's career deeper meaning, helping working families achieve the security and dignity of homeownership, revealed how completely Victoria had misunderstood or chose to ignore what truly drove my son's professional satisfaction and personal sense of purpose. More troubling was Michael's immediate apologetic response, as though his desire to help people of modest means was indeed a character flaw, rather than a noble calling that honored his father's values. The foundation of strength that Thomas and I had built together, both in our home and in our careful, decades-long financial planning, was about to prove far more solid and strategically positioned than Victoria's aggressive confidence could shake. But she would only discover this truth after pushing me past the point where silence and restraint remained possible. As their marriage entered its 4th year, Victoria's campaign to convince me to sell my home intensified dramatically. What had begun as occasional suggestions framed as concern for my well-being evolved into a systematic pressure campaign involving researched arguments, financial projections, and increasingly manipulative emotional appeals. She began scheduling what she called family planning meetings at their Willowbrook home, presenting professionally prepared documents outlining why my continued residence at 412 Maple Grove Lane was both financially irresponsible and personally dangerous. Eleanor, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of your current situation, Victoria announced during one such meeting, spreading glossy folders across their granite kitchen island like a real estate presentation. The numbers don't lie. You're sitting on nearly $800,000 in home equity that's generating zero return while requiring increasing maintenance investments. Meanwhile, the monthly costs of appropriate senior living would be completely covered by the interest income from investing the proceeds of your home sale. Her presentations were impressively thorough, complete with market comparisons, charts showing maintenance cost projections, and brochures from upscale senior communities featuring smiling elderly residents engaged in social activities. She had clearly invested significant time and professional expertise into building a compelling case for why I should abandon the home Thomas and I had spent 50 years creating together. Look at these beautiful facilities, she continued, pointing to photographs of elegantly appointed dining rooms and landscaped courtyards, 24-hour medical support, organized social activities, maintenance-free living, and a built-in community of people your own age. You'd never have to worry about home repairs, yard work, or safety issues again. What Victoria failed to understand, either through genuine ignorance or willful disregard, was that the things she characterized as burdens were actually sources of meaning and connection for me. The garden Thomas and I had planned together wasn't just landscaping requiring maintenance, it was a living memorial to our shared dreams and seasonal rhythms that had structured our life together. The historic preservation projects weren't expensive complications. They were my contribution to maintaining Millbrook Heights' architectural heritage for future generations. Michael's participation in these meetings was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire campaign. The confident, independent thinking son I had raised increasingly parroted Victoria's arguments and perspectives, using language and concepts that clearly originated from her rather than from his own analysis or values. "Mom, you have to admit that Victoria makes a lot of sense," he would say, avoiding direct eye contact while reviewing her carefully prepared materials. Dad always taught us to make practical decisions based on facts rather than emotions. The financial analysis clearly shows that staying in the house isn't the most rational choice for your long-term security. This selective interpretation of Thomas's wisdom, ignoring his deep belief in the importance of home, community, and continuity while emphasizing only financial pragmatism, revealed how thoroughly Victoria had managed to reshape Michael's understanding of his own family's values. She had taken Thomas's practical wisdom and stripped it of its emotional and philosophical context, reducing it to purely monetary considerations. During one particularly intense family meeting in early spring, Victoria unveiled what she clearly considered her masterstroke: a specific purchase offer from one of her high-end clients who had been discreetly inquiring about properties in my neighborhood. "This is actually perfect timing," she announced with barely contained excitement, producing a formal letter of intent. "The Hendersons are looking for exactly the kind of historic property your house represents. They're prepared to offer $850,000, which is $50,000 above current market value, for a quick private sale with flexible timing that would allow you to transition gradually to your new living situation." The letter was impressive and official-looking, complete with financial pre-approval documentation and a proposed closing timeline that seemed designed to minimize stress and maximize my financial benefit. Victoria had clearly orchestrated this coincidental inquiry as the perfect solution to what she had spent months characterizing as my increasingly untenable situation. "They specifically love the Victorian architecture and historic significance," she continued, her voice taking on the persuasive tone I recognized from her professional sales presentations. "They're committed to maintaining the property's character while making necessary updates for modern living. Your house would be in excellent hands, and you'd be financially secure for the rest of your life." What Victoria didn't realize was that her very thoroughness in building this case was revealing information I found deeply troubling. The specific financial details she had access to, the precise knowledge of my property's assessed value and potential market price, the convenient timing of the Hendersons' interest, all suggested she had been researching my situation and laying groundwork for this pressure campaign much longer and more systematically than her presentation of spontaneous concern would suggest. More significantly, her confident assumption that I would be swayed by financial arguments alone revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what motivated my decisions. Like many people who measure everything in monetary terms, Victoria seemed genuinely unable to comprehend that some choices are based on values that can't be quantified in dollars and cents. "I appreciate the research you've done," I responded, carefully studying the professional materials spread across their kitchen island. "But I'm not interested in selling my home, regardless of the financial terms being offered. The house isn't just an investment property to me. It's where Thomas and I built our life together, where Michael grew up, where our family's history lives." Victoria's expression tightened with frustration that she struggled to conceal behind a mask of concerned reasonableness. "Eleanor, I understand the emotional attachment, but we have to be realistic about your situation. The arthritis is only going to get worse, the house is only going to require more expensive maintenance, and property values might not always be this favorable for sellers." This shift from patient persuasion to thinly veiled pressure tactics marked a turning point in our relationship. Where Victoria had previously maintained a facade of daughter-in-law concern, She was now revealing the calculating mindset that viewed my attachment to my home as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a legitimate preference to be respected. Michael and I are trying to help you make the best possible decisions while you still have good options available, she continued, her voice taking on an edge that hadn't been present in earlier conversations. But eventually, these choices might not be yours to make anymore. The implied threat in that statement, that my capacity to make decisions about my own life and property might somehow be challenged if I didn't voluntarily comply with their preferences, sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the spring weather. This wasn't the language of family members concerned about my well-being. It was the language of people who viewed my independence as inconvenient to their plans. Throughout the late spring and early summer, the pressure intensified further. Victoria began making unannounced visits to my home, ostensibly to check on my well-being, but actually to document what she characterized as mounting evidence of my inability to maintain the property adequately. She would arrive with her phone camera ready to photograph any minor maintenance issues, a loose board on the front porch, weeds in the garden, paint peeling on the back fence, creating what appeared to be a systematic catalog of my supposed declining capacity for home ownership. "I'm just worried about you living here alone," she would say while photographing the garden shed's slightly sagging door. "What if something happened and no one knew? What if you fell and couldn't reach a phone? What if the furnace failed in winter, or the roof started leaking during a storm?" These visits became increasingly frequent and intrusive, often scheduled during times when Michael was at work and couldn't witness Victoria's behavior firsthand. She would invite herself in for coffee, then spend the visit pointing out potential safety hazards, maintenance needs, and signs of what she characterized as my declining ability to care for myself properly. "Eleanor, I found 3 expired medications in your bathroom cabinet," she announced during one such visit, having apparently conducted a search while I was preparing refreshments. "And the kitchen faucet is dripping. There's a loose handrail on the back steps, and the basement has that musty smell that suggests moisture problems. These are exactly the kinds of issues that demonstrate why staying here is becoming unsafe." The violation of conducting a search through my personal belongings while pretending to make a friendly visit was both shocking and illuminating. Victoria was no longer even attempting to maintain the pretense of respecting boundaries or treating me as an autonomous adult capable of managing my own affairs. More disturbing was her systematic documentation of every minor household issue as evidence of my incompetence, while ignoring the far more significant evidence of my continued capability: my active participation in professional organizations, my volunteer work with the Historic Preservation Society, my independent management of complex financial affairs, and my maintenance of social relationships and community involvement. During one particularly manipulative visit in early July, Victoria arrived with printed materials from what she claimed was a confidential consultation with an elder care specialist who had reviewed my situation and recommended immediate transition to assisted living. Dr. Patricia Moran is one of the region's leading experts in geriatric care transitions, Victoria announced, producing official-looking documents. "I described your living situation and health challenges, and she's very concerned about the safety risks of continuing to live alone in such a large old house. She's recommending immediate evaluation for appropriate placement." The documents appeared professionally prepared and authoritative, complete with medical terminology and official recommendations for assessment and placement. What Victoria didn't know was that my decades in real estate had made me skilled at recognizing fraudulent or misleading documentation. And something about Dr. Moran's supposed recommendations didn't pass careful scrutiny. That evening, I conducted my own research into Dr. Patricia Moran and discovered that while she was indeed a legitimate geriatric care specialist, she had never consulted on my case because Victoria had never provided her with accurate information about my actual health status, living situation, or functional capabilities. The confidential consultation Victoria had referenced was actually a general informational inquiry about senior living options that Victoria had then misrepresented as a specific professional recommendation about my case. This discovery, that Victoria was willing to fabricate medical professional opinions to support her campaign, marked a crucial turning point in my understanding of what I was actually dealing with. This wasn't family concern or even misguided pressure. This was systematic manipulation using deliberately deceptive tactics designed to undermine my confidence in my own judgment and capabilities. 2 weeks later, Victoria escalated her campaign to a level that crossed every remaining boundary of family respect and personal autonomy. She arrived at my home accompanied by Michael and 2 people she introduced as transition specialists from Meadowbrook Senior Community, one of the facilities she had been promoting in her presentations. Eleanor, we've arranged for a professional evaluation of your current living situation, Victoria announced without preamble, gesturing to the 2 uniformed individuals carrying clipboards and assessment materials. Sarah and Robert are here to conduct a comprehensive home safety audit and personal care assessment to help determine the most appropriate next steps for your well-being. The audacity of arranging a professional assessment of my competency without my consent or prior knowledge was breathtaking. Victoria had apparently decided that my continued resistance to her suggestions warranted bringing in outside authorities to validate her position and potentially override my autonomous decision-making. I didn't request any assessment, I told the specialists firmly, and I don't consent to one being conducted. Sarah, the lead evaluator, looked uncomfortable as she realized she had been brought into a family conflict under potentially false pretenses. Ma'am, we were told this was a voluntary evaluation requested by family members concerned about your safety and well-being. It was not requested by me, and I do not consent to it, I repeated clearly, establishing for all present that this was an unauthorized intrusion rather than a collaborative family effort. Victoria's response revealed the depth of her frustration with my continued resistance to her increasingly aggressive campaign. Eleanor, this is exactly the kind of unreasonable behavior that proves you're not thinking clearly anymore. Refusing professional help and evaluation is a classic sign of declining judgment and capacity. This circular logic, that resistance to unwanted intervention was itself evidence of incompetence requiring intervention, was a manipulation tactic I recognized from my professional experience with property disputes involving elder exploitation. Victoria was attempting to create a situation where any assertion of my autonomy could be reframed as evidence supporting her claims about my declining capacity. Michael stood silent during this confrontation, his discomfort evident, but his loyalty clearly torn between his mother and his wife. When I asked him directly whether he had known about and approved this attempted assessment, his hesitation before answering told me everything I needed to know about how completely Victoria had managed to influence his judgment. "Mom, we're just worried about you," he finally said, using the same language Victoria had been repeating for months. "If you're really managing fine, then an assessment would prove that and put our concerns to rest." This attempted reversal, suggesting that I should submit to evaluation to prove my competence rather than requiring them to demonstrate actual incompetence before seeking intervention, revealed how thoroughly Victoria had managed to reshape even Michael's understanding of basic principles of autonomy and dignity. After the specialists left, clearly uncomfortable with the family dynamics they had witnessed, Victoria remained for what became the most confrontational conversation we had ever had. With Michael present but largely silent, she abandoned all pretense of concern and revealed the calculating nature that had been driving her campaign all along. "Eleanor, let's be completely honest about what's happening here," she said, her tone shifting to professional coldness. "You're 73 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you to maintain properly, dealing with health issues that are only going to get worse, and sitting on financial assets that could provide security for your entire family if managed intelligently." This explicit acknowledgement that her focus was on accessing my financial assets for the entire family rather than ensuring my well-being confirmed what I had long suspected about her true motivations. "Michael and I are building something important. Together," she continued. "And we can't do that effectively while worrying constantly about your safety and the inefficient use of family resources that could benefit everyone if deployed strategically." The phrase family resources to describe my home and assets, property that Thomas and I had worked 50 years to build and that belonged entirely to me, revealed the sense of entitlement that had been driving Victoria's campaign from the beginning. "Your house isn't just your house," she stated with breathtaking presumption. "It's Michael's inheritance, it's our family's financial future, and it's currently being wasted on maintaining a lifestyle that's no longer practical or safe for someone in your condition." This explicit claim on my property, as though it already belonged to her and Michael, combined with the characterization of my independent living as wasteful, represented a level of presumption and disrespect that crossed every boundary of appropriate family behavior. The breaking point came on a sweltering August afternoon when Victoria arrived at my home without invitation or advance notice, accompanied by a moving company truck and a team of workers she had apparently hired to begin helping me pack for my transition. "I've arranged everything," she announced, directing the workers toward my front door as though she had authority over my property and possessions. "Meadowbrook Senior Community has a beautiful suite available immediately, and the Hendersons are prepared to expedite closing on the house purchase. We can have you moved and settled within the week." The sight of strangers with boxes and packing materials entering my home without my permission, under Victoria's direction, was so shocking that for a moment I could only stand frozen in disbelief. This wasn't family pressure or emotional manipulation. This was an actual attempt to forcibly relocate me against my will. "Stop immediately," I commanded, my voice carrying the authority I had developed through decades of professional negotiations. "You have no right to enter my home with moving personnel, and I am not relocating anywhere." Victoria's response revealed the full extent of her sense of entitlement and control. "Eleanor, we've been patient with your denial and resistance, but this situation has gone on long enough. Michael and I have legal responsibility for your well-being, and we're not going to stand by and watch you endanger yourself out of stubborn attachment to a house you can't properly maintain." The claim of legal responsibility for my well-being was both false and deeply revealing. Victoria was either genuinely deluded about having legal authority over my affairs, or she was deliberately using false claims to justify her actions, neither possibility reflecting well on her character or judgment. "You have no legal authority over me or my property," I informed her clearly, positioning myself between the workers and my living room where family photographs and personal belongings had already been placed in boxes without my consent. "I am legally competent, financially independent, and entirely capable of making my own decisions about my living situation." What followed was the confrontation that would forever define our relationship and mark the point of no return in Victoria's campaign to control my life and assets. With the moving workers as unwilling witnesses to our family conflict, Victoria abandoned all pretense of concern and revealed the calculating entitlement that had been driving her behavior all along. "Get out! This isn't your home anymore," she screamed, her composure completely shattered by my continued resistance to her control. "You're a burden, you're unsafe, and you're being selfish and unreasonable. Michael and I have planned your future, and you're going to accept it whether you like it or not." Standing in the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family, where Thomas and I had shared coffee and conversation every morning for 45 years, where Michael had done homework at the counter and learned to cook alongside his father, I felt something fundamental break inside me that could never be repaired. The words, "This isn't your home anymore," from the woman who had never contributed a single day of work or dollar of investment to the house Thomas and I had built together, revealed the depth of her sense of entitlement and the complete absence of respect for my autonomy, my history, or my rights. But what Victoria didn't realize as she stood in my kitchen, directing strangers to pack my belongings against my will, was that her campaign to force me out of my home had triggered preparations she couldn't possibly imagine. The quiet, aging mother-in-law she saw as an obstacle to her ambitions was about to reveal resources and strategic positioning that would transform our entire family dynamic. The foundation Thomas and I had built together, both literal and financial, was far more solid and strategically positioned than Victoria's aggressive confidence could shake. And within 6 months, the woman who had tried to force me out of my family home would discover exactly who really held the keys to her future. The game Victoria thought she was winning was about to change in ways she never could have anticipated. And the rules of that new game would be written by someone who understood both property law and family loyalty far better than she had ever imagined. After Victoria's explosive outburst and the humiliating scene with the moving truck, I made a decision that would change everything. Standing in my violated kitchen, surrounded by boxes packed without my permission, I looked at my son, the man Thomas and I had raised to value integrity and respect, and saw a stranger who had allowed his wife to orchestrate an attempted forced relocation of his own mother. "Michael," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions coursing through me. "I want you and Victoria to leave my home immediately. When you're ready to have a conversation based on respect rather than coercion, you know where to find me." Victoria's face flushed with fury at being dismissed from what she clearly considered her domain to control. "You can't throw us out. We're trying to help you and you're being completely unreasonable." "This is my home," I replied with calm finality, "and I'm asking you to leave. Now." The moving workers, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama they had witnessed, quickly departed with their unused boxes and packing materials. Victoria continued her protests, but Michael, perhaps recognizing something in my tone that reminded him of his father's quiet authority, finally convinced her to leave. Alone in my house for the first time in months without the shadow of Victoria's manipulative presence, I allowed myself exactly 1 hour to grieve. I sat in Thomas's old armchair, surrounded by the life we had built together, and acknowledged the devastating reality that my relationship with my son might be permanently damaged by the choices he had made and the influence he had allowed to reshape his values. But after that hour of grief, I shifted into the strategic mindset that had made me successful in commercial real estate for 4 decades. Victoria had made a crucial error in her campaign. She had revealed the full extent of her intentions and methods while underestimating both my capabilities and my preparations. Now it was time to show her exactly what she was actually dealing with. That evening, I made a series of phone calls that would begin the process of transforming our family dynamic in ways Victoria could never have anticipated. The first call was to Harrison & Associates, the premier property law firm in our region, where I had maintained a professional relationship for over 20 years through my appraisal work. "James, this is Eleanor Hartwell," I said to James Harrison, the senior partner. "I need to schedule a consultation regarding some family property matters that have become urgent. I believe it's time to implement some strategies we discussed several years ago." The second call was to Margaret Stonefield, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse cases. Her services weren't something I had ever expected to need within my own family, but Victoria's systematic campaign and documented deceptions had created a situation requiring professional intervention. "Margaret, I need a comprehensive investigation into someone who may be attempting to manipulate my financial affairs through fraudulent means," I explained. "I have documentation of forged medical consultations, unauthorized property assessments, and what appears to be a systematic campaign of coercion. This is a family member, so discretion is essential, but accuracy is even more important." The third call was to David Chen, my longtime colleague from the Regional Appraisers Association, who had recently expanded his firm into property management and investment consulting. "David, do you remember that conversation we had about strategic property positioning for retirement security? I think it's time to move forward with some of those ideas we discussed. I have a situation that requires both immediate protection and long-term strategic advantage." Over the following week, while Victoria and Michael apparently assumed their pressure campaign had succeeded in breaking my resistance, I was actually implementing a series of legal and financial maneuvers that had been years in the planning. What they didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that Thomas and I had begun strategic estate and asset protection planning shortly after his retirement, working with specialists to ensure that our life's work would be protected from exactly the kind of exploitation Victoria was attempting. The foundation of my counter-strategy was something Victoria's focus on my house had caused her to completely overlook. The fact that Thomas and I hadn't just been homeowners building equity in a single property. We had been systematic real estate investors for over 3 decades, quietly acquiring properties throughout Millbrook Heights and the surrounding region, often purchasing distressed buildings that my professional eye could identify as undervalued opportunities. Our investment strategy had been methodical and conservative, buying properties below market value, making careful improvements that increased both rent potential and long-term value, then either holding them as rental income or selling them at strategic times when market conditions were optimal. Thomas handled the renovation planning and contractor management, while I provided professional market analysis and property evaluation. By the time Thomas passed away, our portfolio included 14 rental properties throughout the region, ranging from small apartment buildings to historic commercial spaces that we had rescued from demolition and carefully restored. The total value of this portfolio had grown to over $3.2 million, generating monthly rental income that, combined with our retirement savings and investments, made me far more financially secure than either Victoria or Michael realized. What made this particularly relevant to Victoria's campaign was something she couldn't possibly have known. One of our investment properties was the entire building that housed Willowbrook Estates' sales office, the very facility where Victoria worked, as a marketing director for Prestige Property Group. Thomas and I had purchased the building 15 years earlier when the previous owner faced bankruptcy. At the time, it was a deteriorating structure in need of significant renovation and modernization. We invested carefully in bringing it up to contemporary commercial standards, then leased it long-term to Prestige Property Group as their regional headquarters and luxury sales center. Victoria had been working in a building I owned for over 2 years, without ever realizing that her despised mother-in-law was actually her landlord. The lease agreement, managed through David Chen's property management company, had always been handled as a business transaction without any family connection being disclosed or apparent. But the most significant property in our portfolio, one that would become central to changing our family dynamic, was something Victoria had never suspected despite all her research into my financial situation. 6 months before Thomas's death, we had quietly purchased the entire Willowbrook Estates development where Victoria and Michael lived. The original developer had overextended himself during the construction phase and faced foreclosure when the 2008 financial crisis reduced demand for luxury housing. Thomas and I, working through a carefully structured investment entity, had acquired the entire development, 47 luxury homes, the community center, and all common areas, for approximately 60% of its original development cost. Our approach to managing the development had been deliberately low profile. We hired established property management companies to handle day-to-day operations, maintained the development's prestigious reputation and amenities, and allowed existing homeowners to continue thinking of themselves as independent property owners in an exclusive community. Most residents, including Victoria and Michael, had no idea that their monthly homeowners association fees were actually rent payments to the development's owner. Victoria and Michael had been living in a house I owned for over 3 years, paying rent to me indirectly through their homeowners association dues, while Victoria simultaneously pressured me to sell my family home because I supposedly couldn't afford to maintain it independently. The irony was perfect, but the strategic opportunity was even better. As the owner of Willowbrook Estates, I had both the legal authority and practical leverage to address Victoria's behavior in ways she had never anticipated. Every resident lease agreement included standard behavioral clauses designed to maintain the community's reputation and peaceful environment. Victoria's systematic harassment of a community member, me, and her attempts to manipulate family relationships through coercion and fraudulent documentation constituted clear violations of multiple lease terms. 2 weeks after the moving truck incident, I was ready to implement the first phase of my response. The private investigator had completed her initial report, documenting Victoria's pattern of deception, including the fraudulent medical consultation, unauthorized property assessments, and systematic campaign of harassment designed to force my relocation. The property law firm had prepared the necessary documentation to establish my legal ownership claims and prepare for any challenges Victoria might attempt. Most importantly, David Chen had completed a comprehensive review of all lease agreements and property management contracts, confirming that I had both the legal standing and practical mechanisms necessary to address Victoria's behavior through official channels rather than family confrontation. On a crisp September morning, exactly 3 weeks after Victoria had screamed, "Get out! This isn't your home anymore," in my kitchen, I implemented my response with the precision of a chess grandmaster executing a long-planned strategy. The first move was a certified letter delivered to Victoria and Michael at their Willowbrook estate's address, not as their family member, but as their landlord. The letter, on official letterhead from Chen Property Management Services, informed them that multiple serious lease violations had been documented and that immediate corrective action was required to avoid termination of their residency agreement. 3. Letter detailed specific violations including harassment of other community members, attempts to manipulate property ownership records, fraudulent representation of medical consultations, and behavior detrimental to the community's peaceful environment. Each violation was documented with dates, witness statements, and supporting evidence that Margaret Stonefield's investigation had compiled. But the letter's most shocking revelation was its signature block, which clearly identified Eleanor Hartwell as the sole owner of Willowbrook Estates Development and the ultimate authority for all residency decisions within the community. Can only imagine Victoria's reaction when she opened that letter and realized that the burden she had been trying to force out of an unaffordable home was actually the owner of her exclusive luxury development, the landlord she had been paying rent to for over 3 years, and the authority figure who now held complete control over her housing situation. The second move came that same afternoon. An official notice from Chen Property Management Services to Prestige Property Group, informing them that their lease for the Willowbrook Estates sales office would not be renewed when it expired in 6 months, due to documented unprofessional conduct by a staff member that had created liability concerns for the property owner. Victoria's employer learned before she did that her harassment campaign against her mother-in-law had jeopardized not only her own housing situation, but also her company's prestigious headquarters location. In a single day, Victoria's actions had put both her home and her career in jeopardy. Consequences she had never imagined when she assumed she was bullying a vulnerable elderly woman with limited resources or options. The third move was more personal but equally devastating. I scheduled a lunch meeting with Michael at our traditional restaurant, Riverside Cafe, but this time I came prepared with documents instead of maternal concern. "Michael," I began, spreading the property ownership records, lease agreements, and investigation reports across our familiar table, "I want you to understand exactly what your wife has been doing and what the consequences of her actions are going to be." The transformation in Michael's expression as he reviewed the evidence was heartbreaking to witness. The careful manipulation Victoria had orchestrated, the fabricated medical consultations, the fraudulent competency concerns, the systematic documentation of my supposed incapacity, was laid bare in official reports and documented evidence that he couldn't dismiss or rationalize. "Mom, I didn't know," he said, his voice hollow as he stared at copies of forged documents Victoria had presented as legitimate medical opinions. "She told me Dr. Moran had serious concerns about your safety. She said the moving truck was necessary because you were becoming confused and weren't making rational decisions. Your wife lied to you systematically and consistently, I replied, maintaining professional composure despite the pain of seeing my son's realization that he had been manipulated as thoroughly as she had tried to manipulate me. She fabricated medical consultations, arranged unauthorized assessments, violated my privacy and autonomy, and attempted to force my relocation through fraud and coercion. Michael's hands shook as he reviewed Margaret Stonefield's investigation report, which included audio recordings Victoria had made of our conversations without consent, photographs she had taken of my property without permission, and copies of communications with her employer, where she had discussed plans to resolve the family situation by gaining control of my assets. "But Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "if you own Willowbrook Estates, if you've had this much financial security all along, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let Victoria think you were struggling to maintain your house?" This question, the heart of his confusion and perhaps the beginning of his understanding, deserved a complete answer. Because, Michael, true security comes from self-reliance and strategic preparation, not from displaying wealth or power to influence others' behavior. Your father and I built our financial independence quietly and carefully, without needing external validation or family acknowledgement. I paused, allowing him to process this fundamental difference in values before continuing. More importantly, because I wanted to see who you and Victoria really were when you thought I was vulnerable. A person's character is revealed not by how they treat those with power, but by how they treat those they perceive as powerless. Michael's tears began then, grief for the mother-son relationship that Victoria's manipulation had damaged, shame for his complicity in her campaign, and recognition of how completely he had allowed her priorities to override the values his father and I had spent decades teaching him. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice carrying both fear and resignation. "That depends entirely on your choices going forward," I replied. Victoria's lease violations require immediate correction or termination. Her employer has been notified about the professional liability her actions have created. Her systematic harassment and fraud have been documented by professional investigators and could support criminal charges if I choose to pursue them. I gathered the documents back into their folder before delivering the final component of my response. "But Michael, you are my son, and despite everything that has happened, I love you and want you to have the opportunity to rebuild your life, based on authentic values, rather than the manipulative priorities Victoria has substituted for them." What I offered next had been the most difficult decision in this entire process, but it represented the wisdom Thomas and I had always shared about the difference between consequences and punishment, between justice and revenge. Victoria has 30 days to cease all harassment, provide written apology acknowledging her fraudulent and manipulative behavior, and commit to professional counseling to address the mindset that led to her actions. If she meets these requirements, her lease violations will be considered resolved, and she can continue living at Willowbrook Estates under supervised probation. Michael's relief was palpable, but I continued before he could respond. However, if she chooses to escalate this conflict, to challenge my authority, or to continue her manipulative behavior in any form, I will pursue every legal remedy available, including criminal fraud charges, civil harassment claims, and immediate eviction proceedings. "And your relationship with me," I concluded, meeting his eyes directly, "depends on whether you choose to be part of the solution or continue enabling her destructive behavior. I will not tolerate further attempts to manipulate, control, or disrespect me, regardless of the family relationships involved." That evening, I sat in Thomas's chair surrounded by the legal documents and investigation reports that had transformed our family dynamic so completely in a single day. The grief remained, for the innocence lost, for the trust damaged, for the realization that my own son had been willing to participate in forcing me from my home based on fabricated concerns and manipulated information. But alongside the grief, was something I hadn't felt in months. The satisfaction of justice served and strategic preparation validated. Victoria had tried to force me out of my home by portraying me as a burden and an obstacle to the family's financial success. Instead, she had discovered that the woman she had dismissed as powerless actually held the keys to her own housing, her career stability, and her future security. The foundation Thomas and I had built together, both the literal home she had tried to steal and the financial security she had tried to manipulate, had proven far more solid and strategically positioned than her aggressive campaigns could shake. And within exactly 6 months from her cruel words in my kitchen, Victoria was learning exactly who really held the power in our family's future. The game she thought she was winning had changed completely, and the new rules were written by someone who understood both property law and family loyalty far better than she had ever imagined. What remained to be seen was whether Victoria would choose to accept the consequences of her actions with dignity, or whether her sense of entitlement would drive her to escalate a conflict she had already lost before she even realized she was playing it. But for the first time since Thomas's death, I felt fully in control of my own life and secure in the knowledge that no one would ever again be able to threaten the home and legacy we had built together. The woman who had screamed, "Get out, this isn't your home anymore," had discovered that home, real home, belongs to those who build it with love, patience, and strategic wisdom, not to those who try to claim it through manipulation and force. And in my quiet Victorian house on Maple Grove Lane, surrounded by the evidence of careful planning and the satisfaction of justice well served, I finally felt Thomas's presence again, not as loss, but as validation that the values we had shared together had created something strong enough to withstand any storm, and wise enough to turn even betrayal into an opportunity for truth and renewal. Victoria's response to my ultimatum came exactly 72 hours after the certified letters were delivered, and it revealed everything I needed to know about her character when faced with consequences for her actions. Rather than accepting responsibility or seeking reconciliation, she chose escalation, a decision that would prove to be the final nail in the coffin of any possibility for peaceful resolution. The first indication of her response came through Michael, who arrived at my door on Thursday evening looking haggard and defeated. His appearance shocked me. The confident, well-groomed man I had known all his life looked as though he hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. Dark circles shadowed. His eyes and his usually impeccable clothes were wrinkled and disheveled. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Victoria wants to fight this. She's hired Jonathan Blackwood from Blackwood and Associates to challenge your ownership claims. She says you're using fraudulent documents and that this is elder abuse in reverse, a competent older person manipulating legal systems to harm younger family members." Jonathan Blackwood was notorious in Millbrook Heights legal circles as an attorney who specialized in high-conflict cases involving wealthy families, often taking positions that were legally questionable but designed to create maximum disruption and leverage through expensive litigation. His reputation was built on exhausting opponents through procedural warfare rather than winning cases on merit. "She's also filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission claiming you've been operating property management businesses without proper licensing," Michael continued, his voice growing quieter as he delivered each piece of increasingly disturbing news. "And she's contacted Adult Protective Services to report that you're experiencing delusions of ownership and may need competency evaluation." The comprehensive nature of Victoria's counterattack was both impressive and deeply revealing. Rather than addressing any of the documented evidence of her own fraudulent behavior, she had chosen to attack me personally and professionally while attempting to reverse the narrative entirely. She was trying to position herself as the victim of an unstable elderly woman's vindictive fantasies rather than accepting responsibility for her systematic campaign of harassment and manipulation. "Michael," I said carefully, studying my son's defeated expression, "do you believe Victoria's claims? Do you think I'm delusional about owning properties that have been in my name for years?" Do you think the legal documents, property records, and professional investigations are all products of my imagination? The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know about the impossible position Victoria had created for him. His love for me was competing with his loyalty to his wife, and the cognitive dissonance was clearly tearing him apart. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "The documents look real. The evidence seems legitimate. But Victoria says you're capable of creating very convincing fraudulent records because of your professional background. She says people with early-stage dementia often become paranoid and develop elaborate fantasies about hidden wealth or secret power. This suggestion, that my response to Victoria's harassment was actually evidence of mental illness rather than strategic self-defense, represented a new level of manipulation that took my breath away. Victoria was attempting to weaponize concerns about aging and cognitive decline to discredit overwhelming evidence of her own misconduct. She says the fact that you never mentioned owning all these properties proves you've been hiding things from family, which is a classic sign of cognitive decline and financial confusion, Michael continued, clearly reciting arguments Victoria had prepared for him. "And the coincidence of you supposedly owning both our house and her office building seems too convenient to be believable." The twisted logic was almost admirable in its comprehensiveness. Victoria had found a way to reframe every piece of evidence against her as support for her new narrative, that I was a confused elderly woman whose professional knowledge had enabled me to create convincing but fraudulent documentation of imaginary wealth and power. "Michael," I said gently, recognizing that this conversation would determine the future of our relationship permanently, "I'm going to give you a choice. You can continue believing Victoria's version of events and supporting her legal challenges to documentation that can be verified through public records, professional investigations, and court filings. Or you can spend tomorrow morning with me, visiting the county assessor's office, reviewing the actual property records, and speaking directly with the professionals who have managed these properties for years." I paused, letting the significance of this moment settle between us. "But I need you to understand that this choice isn't just about property ownership or family conflict. It's about whether you're willing to acknowledge objective reality when it conflicts with what you want to believe, and whether you can still distinguish between evidence and manipulation. If you choose to continue supporting Victoria's narrative, after reviewing the actual documentation," I continued, my voice steady but firm, "then you're choosing to prioritize her version of reality over verifiable facts. And if that's your choice, then our relationship will need to be restructured accordingly, because I will not tolerate being accused of fraud, delusion, or elder abuse by my own son based on his wife's desperate attempts to avoid responsibility for her own documented misconduct." Michael's tears began then, not the composed emotion of someone processing difficult information, but the raw grief of someone recognizing that his life had been built on foundations that were crumbling beneath him. He agreed to spend the following morning reviewing the actual evidence with me, but his expression suggested he already knew what he would find and was mourning the comfortable illusions that discovering the truth would destroy. The next morning, our visit to the Millbrook Heights county assessor's office was both illuminating and heartbreaking. Michael sat in stunned silence as clerk after clerk pulled property records, ownership documents, and tax payment histories that conclusively established my ownership of 14 properties throughout the region, including the Willowbrook Estates, development and the Prestige Property Group office building. "These records go back 15 years, explained Patricia Morrison, the senior clerk who had handled many of my property transactions over the years. Mrs. Hartwell and her late husband were very strategic buyers, often purchasing distressed properties that others overlooked and then improving them significantly. She's been one of our most consistent property taxpayers and has never had any issues with documentation or compliance." From the assessor's office, we drove to Chen Property Management Services, where David Chen provided Michael with copies of every lease agreement, rent payment record, and maintenance report for the Willowbrook Estates development. The documentation showed clearly that Victoria and Michael's monthly Homeowners Association payments had been flowing directly to accounts controlled by Eleanor Hartwell for over 3 years. "Your mother has been an exemplary property owner," David explained to Michael, pulling out files that documented every aspect of the development's management. "She's invested heavily in maintaining the community's amenities, approved significant improvements to common areas, and never interfered with management decisions unless major capital investments were required. Most residents have no idea who the actual owner is because she prefers to operate through professional management companies rather than being personally involved in day-to-day operations." The final stop was Margaret Stonefield's office, where Michael reviewed the complete investigation report documenting Victoria's fraudulent behavior. The evidence was overwhelming and professionally presented: audio recordings, forged documents, witness statements, and a comprehensive timeline showing the systematic nature of Victoria's campaign against me. "This is textbook elder manipulation," Margaret explained, walking Michael through each component of the investigation. "The fabricated medical consultations, the unauthorized property assessments, the attempts to create false documentation of cognitive decline, these are all standard techniques used by family members attempting to gain control of elderly relatives' assets through legal manipulation, rather than legitimate guardianship proceedings." By the time we returned to my house that afternoon, Michael was a different person than the confused, conflicted man who had arrived the previous evening. The crushing weight of recognizing how thoroughly he had been manipulated was evident in his every movement and expression. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, sitting heavily in Thomas's old chair as though the physical weight of his realization was too much to bear standing. "I believed her. I actually helped her try to force you out of your own home. I participated in trying to steal your autonomy and independence based on lies and manipulation I should have seen through." The pain in his voice was genuine and heartbreaking, but I knew that recognition was only the first step in what would need to be a much longer process of rebuilding trust and reestablishing authentic relationship patterns. "Michael, the question now isn't how we got here, but where we go from here," I said, taking the chair across from him where Thomas and I had shared thousands of evening conversations. "Victoria has made her choice to escalate this conflict rather than accept responsibility. Now you need to make your choice about whether you're going to continue enabling her behavior or start making decisions based on values rather than convenience." Over. The following week, as Victoria's legal challenges began working their way through various bureaucratic systems, the true scope of her desperation became apparent. Jonathan Blackwood had filed motions challenging my property ownership despite the overwhelming documentary evidence, apparently hoping that expensive litigation would pressure me into a settlement that would allow Victoria to save face while avoiding accountability. More disturbing were the reports to Adult Protective Services and the State Real Estate Commission. Victoria had provided detailed statements claiming that I was experiencing cognitive decline that manifested as elaborate fantasies about hidden wealth and that my family was concerned about my ability to manage my affairs independently. She had even produced witnesses, several of her colleagues from Prestige Property Group, who claimed to have observed concerning behavior during my interactions with their office. What Victoria didn't realize was that Margaret Stonefield's investigation had anticipated this strategy and prepared comprehensive counter-documentation. Every aspect of my cognitive function, professional competence, and independent living capability had been evaluated and documented by qualified professionals who could testify to my complete mental and physical capacity. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the geriatric specialist who conducted my comprehensive evaluation, was particularly effective in her written response to Adult Protective Services. Mrs. Hartwell demonstrates cognitive function consistent with a woman 30 years younger, manages complex financial affairs with exceptional competence, and shows no signs of impairment that would justify any form of guardianship or supervision. The suggestion that she is experiencing delusions about property ownership is contradicted by extensive documentation of actual property ownership spanning decades. Similarly, the State Real Estate Commission's investigation was quickly resolved. When my attorney provided comprehensive documentation of my property management arrangements, all properties were managed through licensed companies, all income was properly reported and taxed, and my role as property owner involved no activities requiring additional licensing beyond what my real estate appraisal credentials already provided. But Victoria's most serious miscalculation was her decision to involve Michael's employer in her campaign. She contacted his financial planning firm to express concerns about his family situation and suggests that his professional judgment might be compromised by stress related to his mother's declining mental health and the family conflict over her imaginary property holdings. This attempt to damage Michael's professional reputation based on false claims about my competency finally pushed him past the last boundary of loyalty to his wife. When his firm's senior partners called him in for a meeting about the family concerns Victoria had raised, Michael realized that her campaign wasn't just about controlling my assets. It was about destroying anyone who might interfere with her goals, including his own career and professional standing. She tried to get me fired, Michael told me during our most difficult conversation yet, his voice hollow with the recognition of how completely Victoria had been willing to sacrifice his well-being for her objectives. She told my partners that I was under stress from dealing with my mother's mental illness and that my judgment couldn't be trusted for major client decisions. She was trying to destroy my career to support her claims about your competency. This revelation marked the final turning point in Michael's understanding of what he was actually married to. The woman he had thought he loved had been willing to destroy his professional reputation, his relationship with his mother, and his emotional well-being to achieve her goal of controlling family assets that had never belonged to her. 2 weeks later, Michael moved out of the Willowbrook Estates house and filed for divorce. His decision was devastating but inevitable. He could no longer remain married to someone whose response to being held accountable for her actions was to systematically attack every relationship and institution that mattered to him. Victoria's response to Michael's departure was to double down on her legal challenges while simultaneously launching a public relations campaign designed to portray herself as the victim of a wealthy family's vindictive retaliation against a working woman who had dared to marry above her station. She gave interviews to local media outlets claiming that her husband's family had used their wealth and legal connections to fabricate property ownership records and manipulate social services investigations. She positioned herself as a whistleblower who had discovered elder fraud and was being punished for trying to protect a vulnerable elderly woman from her own family's exploitation. The strategy was sophisticated and might have been effective against someone with less documentation and professional support. Victoria's media appearances were polished and emotionally compelling, presenting her as a concerned daughter-in-law whose only crime had been caring too much about her husband's mother's welfare. But Margaret Stonefield had prepared for this possibility as well. Within days of Victoria's first media appearance, local news outlets received comprehensive packages of documentation that told the complete story: the systematic harassment campaign, the fabricated medical consultations, the attempted forced relocation, and the frivolous legal challenges filed after Victoria's lease violations were discovered. More damaging to Victoria's narrative were the statements from her own colleagues at Prestige Property Group, several of whom came forward to provide information about her behavior that contradicted her public claims. They described her frequent complaints about her difficult mother-in-law, her open discussions about wanting to force me into assisted living to access my property equity, and her excitement about the potential financial benefits of having me declared incompetent. Victoria talked constantly about how much money the family was leaving on the table by letting the old lady stay in that huge house, one colleague told investigators. She had spreadsheets showing how much they could make if they could get her into a care facility and sell the property. She never talked about it like she was concerned for her mother-in-law's safety. It was always about the money. These revelations, combined with the overwhelming documentation of Victoria's actual behavior, quickly turned public opinion against her manufactured victim narrative. Local media outlets that had initially been sympathetic to her story began investigating more thoroughly and discovered the extensive evidence of her manipulative campaign. The final blow to Victoria's strategy came when the Millbrook Heights Gazette published a comprehensive investigative report titled The Landlord. Next Door: How One Family's Greed Exposed a Hidden Real Estate Empire. The article detailed not only the conflict between Victoria and me, but also the broader story of how Thomas and I had quietly become one of the region's most successful property investment partnerships, while maintaining a modest public profile and contributing significantly to community development. The story resonated far beyond our local community, eventually being picked up by regional and national media outlets as an example of both elder abuse, prevention, and the hidden wealth that often exists within seemingly ordinary families. I found myself featured in articles about strategic property investment, intergenerational wealth planning, and the importance of maintaining financial independence throughout aging. More satisfying than the media attention, however, was the outcome of Victoria's legal challenges. Every motion Jonathan Blackwood filed was dismissed with prejudice due to lack of merit and frivolous claims. The court's final ruling included language that effectively ended any possibility of future legal challenges, while establishing a clear record of Victoria's manipulative behavior. The evidence presented conclusively establishes that Ms. Victoria Ashford engaged in systematic harassment, fraud, and attempted manipulation of an elderly family member for financial gain, Judge Patricia Williams wrote in her final order. Her subsequent attempts to reverse the narrative through frivolous legal challenges and false claims about the victim's competency represent a continuation of the same manipulative pattern. This court finds no merit whatsoever in any of the claims presented by Ms. Ashford or her counsel. Victoria's lease at Willowbrook Estates was terminated 30 days after the court's final ruling. Her employment with Prestige Property Group ended when her behavior created too much negative publicity for the company to ignore. Her divorce from Michael was finalized with a settlement that provided her only what she had brought into the marriage, plus a modest spousal support payment for 2 years, far less than the substantial assets she had tried to claim through manipulation. As I write this final part of my story, 18 months have passed since Victoria screamed, "Get out, this isn't your home anymore," in my kitchen. The woman who tried to force me out of my family home now lives in a small apartment across town, working for a budget real estate firm that specializes in mobile home sales, a dramatic change from her previous position selling luxury properties in buildings I owned. Michael and I have slowly rebuilt our relationship, though it required months of honest conversation about how Victoria's manipulation had affected his judgment and priorities. We attend family counseling together every other week, working to reestablish trust and communication patterns based on mutual respect, rather than the power dynamics Victoria had introduced into our family. I'm not sure I'll ever fully understand how I let her change me so completely, Michael told me during one of our sessions. The person who helped her try to force you out of your home, that wasn't who Dad raised me to be. I lost myself in trying to make her happy, and I nearly lost you in the process. The counseling has been difficult but valuable, helping both of us understand how manipulation works and developing strategies to prevent similar dynamics from developing in future relationships. Michael is dating again, but slowly and carefully, with a much clearer understanding of the warning signs he missed with Victoria. Our family holidays have resumed, though they're different now. Smaller, more focused on genuine connection rather than social performance. Michael helps me with property management decisions, applying his financial planning expertise to optimize our investment strategies while learning aspects of real estate development that complement his existing skills. Most importantly, we've restored the integration of family and professional life that had always characterized our approach before Victoria's influence separated them. Michael now serves as financial advisor for several of the property renovation projects, and his office has developed expertise in real estate investment planning that benefits both our family holdings and his other clients. The Victorian house on Maple Grove Lane remains my primary residence, but it's no longer the quiet retreat it became after Thomas's death. Michael visits regularly, and we've resumed the evening garden conversations that had been such an important part of our family traditions. The house feels alive again, filled with planning discussions, family memories, and the sound of multiple generations working together toward shared goals. I've also begun teaching a monthly seminar at the local community college on strategic property investment for retirement security, sharing the knowledge Thomas and I developed over decades of careful building and financial planning. The classes are popular with both younger families beginning their investment journey and older adults looking to optimize existing assets for long-term security. The most rewarding aspect of this teaching is watching students discover that financial independence isn't about having huge amounts of money, but about understanding how to build security systematically over time through patient planning and strategic decision-making. Many of my students remind me of Thomas and me at younger ages. Couples with modest incomes, but big dreams who are willing to work steadily toward long-term goals rather than seeking quick profits or lifestyle inflation. Victoria's story, meanwhile, serves as a cautionary tale that I sometimes share, without using names, about how entitlement and manipulation ultimately destroy the very relationships and opportunities they're intended to exploit. Her attempt to force me out of my home based on fabricated concerns about my competency backfired so completely that she lost her housing, her career, her marriage, and her community standing. But perhaps more significantly, she lost the opportunity to be part of a family that could have provided genuine security and support if she had approached our relationships with respect rather than calculation. Michael and I both recognize that if Victoria had simply accepted me as I was, treated me with basic dignity, and focused on building authentic relationships rather than manipulating them for advantage, she could have been welcomed into a family with substantial resources and generous hearts. The tragedy isn't just what she did to us, Michael observed recently, but what she cost herself by choosing manipulation over genuine relationship. If she had just been kind to you, if she had respected your autonomy and valued your wisdom, she could have been part of something really special instead of ending up isolated and struggling. This insight reflects the growth Michael has achieved through our counseling and his own reflection on the experience. He now understands that Victoria's behavior wasn't just harmful to me, but ultimately self-defeating, because it destroyed the very relationships and opportunities she was trying to control. As I sit in Thomas's chair this evening, reviewing the day's property management reports and planning tomorrow's investment review meeting with Michael, I feel a deep sense of completion and continuity. The foundation Thomas and I built together, both literal and metaphorical, has proven strong enough to withstand even the most serious challenges while providing security and opportunity for future generations. The woman who tried to convince me that I couldn't afford to maintain my independence discovered that true security comes not from controlling others, but from building something valuable through patient work and strategic planning. The home she tried to steal from me remains mine, not because I fought to keep it, but because Thomas and I had built something far larger and more secure than she ever understood. Most importantly, the values Thomas and I shared, integrity, respect, genuine partnership, and long-term thinking, have survived and been strengthened by the challenge Victoria represented. Michael has rediscovered these principles after temporarily losing them, and our family's future is now based on authentic foundations rather than the manipulative dynamics Victoria had introduced. The Victorian house on Maple Grove Lane stands as solid as ever, its gardens thriving under renewed care, its rooms once again filled with conversation and planning and hope. The foundation Thomas and I built here continues to support not just our family, but the broader community through the affordable housing we provide, the historic preservation work we support, and the economic stability our properties contribute to the region. And every evening, as I tend the roses Thomas planted for our 5th anniversary, I feel his presence in the enduring strength of what we created together. Not just financial security, but a legacy of values that no amount of manipulation or entitlement could ever touch. The woman who screamed, "Get out! This isn't your home anymore," learned that home, real home, belongs to those who build it with love, patience, and strategic wisdom. 5 years have passed since Victoria screamed those fateful words in my kitchen. And as I write this final chapter from the same room where that confrontation took place, I'm struck by how completely our family's story has transformed. The kitchen island, where Victoria once spread her manipulative presentations, now serves as a planning center for the Hartwell Foundation for Sustainable Community Development, the charitable organization Michael and I established to formalize our approach to ethical property investment and community support. This morning, I reviewed applications from 12 young families seeking assistance through our First Home Partnership Program, an initiative that provides down payment assistance and financial literacy education to help working families achieve homeownership in Millbrook Heights. Each application represents not just a business transaction, but a continuation of the values Thomas and I built our life around. The belief that stable housing provides the foundation for everything else meaningful in life. Mrs. Hartwell, the I. Martinez family's application is particularly compelling, explained Sarah Chen, David's daughter, who now serves as the foundation's program coordinator. He's a veteran working 2 jobs to support 3 children, and she's completing her nursing degree while working part-time. They've been saving for 4 years and have excellent financial discipline, but the down payment requirements in today's market are just beyond their reach. These stories of families working hard, making sacrifices, and dreaming of the security that homeownership provides remind me daily why Thomas and I made the choices we did throughout our marriage. We could have lived more extravagantly, could have displayed our wealth more openly, but we chose instead to build something that would continue benefiting others long after we were gone. The foundation now owns and manages 37 properties throughout the region, ranging from affordable rental units to the mixed-income developments we've created by renovating abandoned commercial buildings into modern residential spaces. Our approach remains the same as it was when Thomas and I started. Buy thoughtfully, improve carefully, and always prioritize community benefit alongside financial sustainability. Michael has become an integral partner in this work, applying his financial planning expertise to help our residents build not just stable housing, but long-term wealth through financial literacy programs, homeownership preparation courses, and small business development support. His own journey from manipulation victim back to principled leader has made him particularly effective at recognizing and countering the kinds of predatory financial practices that target vulnerable families. I understand what it's like to have your judgment compromised by someone you trust, he told a group of young couples during last month's financial literacy workshop. The warning signs aren't always obvious, especially when the manipulation comes from people who claim to care about you. But building real security, the kind that no one can take away from you, requires making decisions based on your own values rather than someone else's agenda. His transparency about his own experience with Victoria has made him a powerful advocate for financial independence and critical thinking. The young families who attend our programs see him not as a privileged advisor dispensing wisdom from above, but as someone who has made serious mistakes and learned from them, which makes his guidance more credible and accessible. The most unexpected development in our family story, however, came 3 years ago when Victoria reached out through an intermediary requesting a meeting. After 18 months of struggling in her reduced circumstances, losing 2 subsequent jobs due to her damaged reputation, and facing the reality that her manipulative approach to relationships had left her completely isolated, she had apparently undergone what her message described as significant personal growth and recognition of past errors. My initial instinct was to decline the meeting entirely. Victoria had shown her true character under pressure, and I saw no benefit in reopening communication with someone who had proven capable of such systematic deception and cruelty. But Michael, who had been working with our family counselor on forgiveness and healing, suggested that hearing what Victoria had to say might provide closure for all of us. "I'm not saying we should trust her or let her back into our lives," he explained during one of our regular planning sessions. "But maybe understanding what led to her behavior and seeing whether she's genuinely recognized the harm she caused could help us both move forward more completely." The meeting took place in a neutral location, the conference room at James Harrison's law office, with both my attorney and Michael present to ensure appropriate boundaries. The Victoria who walked into that room was dramatically different from the polished, confident woman who had once tried to orchestrate my forced relocation. She appeared genuinely humbled, her designer clothes replaced by modest professional attire. Her commanding presence softened into something that seemed like authentic remorse. "Eleanor, Michael," she began, her voice quiet and carefully controlled, "I want to start by acknowledging that nothing I say today can undo the harm I caused or excuse the choices I made. I spent 2 years in therapy working to understand how I became someone capable of treating family members the way I treated both of you, and I want to share what I've learned, not to ask for forgiveness, but to take full responsibility for my actions." What followed was the most honest conversation I had ever had with Victoria. Perhaps the most honest conversation she had ever had with anyone. She spoke about growing up in a family where love was conditional on achievement, where financial security was always precarious, and where manipulation and control were normalized as survival strategies. She described how meeting Michael and seeing our family's stability had triggered both deep longing and profound insecurity that she had tried to manage through control rather than vulnerability. "I convinced myself that I was protecting our future by trying to access your assets," she admitted, meeting my eyes directly for the first time in years. "But the truth is that I was terrified of being vulnerable, of depending on relationships I couldn't control. I thought that if I could manipulate the situation to give me financial leverage, I would be safe. Instead, I destroyed the very relationships that could have provided real security." She spoke about the systematic nature of her campaign against me, acknowledging that every element, from the fabricated medical consultations to the attempted forced relocation, had been calculated manipulation designed to undermine my autonomy and access my resources. Most importantly, she recognized how she had manipulated Michael's love for both of us to serve her agenda. "Michael, you tried to honor both your mother and your wife, and I exploited that loyalty to turn you against the person who had spent your entire life demonstrating unconditional love," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I made you complicit in attacking your own mother based on lies and fabricated concerns. That might be the most unforgivable thing I did, not just hurting Eleanor, but making you betray your own values and damage your relationship with her." The conversation lasted over 2 hours, and by its end, I had a much clearer understanding of the psychological and emotional factors that had driven Victoria's behavior. While this understanding didn't excuse her actions or eliminate their consequences, it did provide context that helped me see her as a damaged person, making terrible choices rather than simply an evil force attacking our family. Most significantly, Victoria had used her difficult years to develop genuine insight into manipulation and control patterns. She had completed extensive therapy, volunteered with organizations supporting elder abuse victims, and was working to rebuild her career in a completely different field, social work, specifically helping families navigate housing insecurity and financial crisis. "I want to spend the rest of my life helping people avoid the mistakes I made and defending against the kinds of manipulation I used against your family," she explained. "It's not penance exactly, but it's a way of using what I learned about manipulation to protect others from experiencing what I put you through." Following that meeting, we established what I suppose could be called a cautious détente. Victoria and I exchange Christmas cards each year and occasionally communicate about her work with housing advocacy organizations, but we maintain clear boundaries and realistic expectations. She has never asked for renewed relationship or forgiveness. She seems to understand that some damage is permanent, and her focus is on rebuilding her life according to better principles rather than trying to restore what she destroyed. Michael has developed a more substantial ongoing relationship with her, not as a former spouse, but as someone committed to helping people recover from their worst mistakes. He occasionally consults with her organization about financial planning for families transitioning out of crisis situations, and he credits their interactions with helping him understand forgiveness as a process rather than a single decision. "I may never completely trust Victoria again," he told me after one of their professional collaborations. "But I can see that she's genuinely committed to using her experience to help others. That doesn't erase what she did to us, but it gives her destruction some constructive purpose." This evolution in our family's relationship with Victoria reflects the broader themes that have emerged from our experience. That healing doesn't require reconciliation, that accountability matters more than forgiveness, and that genuine change is demonstrated through sustained action rather than apologies or promises. The foundation Michael and I created has become our family's primary focus, but it has also attracted attention from other property investors interested in our model of combining financial sustainability with community benefit. We now consult with investors across the region who want to develop ethical property portfolios that generate both reasonable returns and positive social impact. Our approach isn't revolutionary. It's simply what property investment looks like, when practiced by people who value community stability and family security over maximum profit extraction. We buy properties that need improvement rather than competing for turnkey investments. We maintain them at high standards rather than extracting every possible dollar through deferred maintenance, and we price them affordably for working families rather than maximizing rent from desperate tenants. The Hartwell model, as it's become known in local property investment circles, demonstrates that ethical practices and financial success aren't contradictory. Our properties maintain higher occupancy rates, require fewer expensive repairs due to preventive maintenance, and generate steady long-term returns that compound more reliably than aggressive short-term profit strategies. More importantly, our approach creates what urban planners call community wealth building, economic development, that strengthens entire neighborhoods rather than extracting resources from them. When working families can afford stable housing, when local businesses can access affordable commercial space, and when property improvements enhance rather than gentrify neighborhoods, everyone benefits from increased stability and prosperity. Last month, the Millbrook Heights City Council officially recognized our foundation's impact on regional housing stability, presenting us with an award for Outstanding Contribution to Community Development. Standing on the steps of City Hall with Michael beside me, holding a plaque that commemorated 30 years of strategic property investment, I felt Thomas's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. He would be so proud of what you've built together, Mayor Jennifer Walsh, no relation despite the shared surname, said during the ceremony. The Hartwell Foundation represents the very best of community partnership, using private resources to address public needs while maintaining financial sustainability that ensures long-term impact. The ceremony was attended by dozens of families who had benefited from our programs, local business owners whose commercial spaces we provide, and community leaders who have collaborated with us on various development projects. But the moment that moved me most was seeing Victoria in the audience, applauding quietly from the back of the crowd. She didn't approach us afterward or attempt to insert herself into the celebration, but her presence felt like acknowledgement that our response to her attack had created something positive that extended far beyond our family conflict. The foundation that began as a way to protect and formalize our property holdings had evolved into a model for how wealth can be used to strengthen communities rather than simply accumulate. That evening, Michael and I sat in Thomas's garden, now expanded and maintained by a part-time groundskeeper who ensures it remains a showcase of native plants and sustainable landscaping techniques. The roses Thomas planted for our 5th anniversary continue to bloom each year, now accompanied by dozens of additional varieties that create a rotation of color and fragrance throughout the growing season. Do you think Dad could have imagined how this would all turn out? Michael asked, watching the sunset illuminate the historic preservation plaque that now designates our house as a contributing property to the Millbrook Heights Historic District. I think he knew that building something worthwhile required patience and strategic thinking, I replied, reviewing the foundation's quarterly impact report that showed we had helped 43 families achieve homeownership and maintained affordable housing for over 200 others. He always said that the best legacy is creating systems that continue benefiting people long after you're gone. As I prepare to conclude this story, I'm aware that its real ending hasn't been written yet. The foundation will continue its work, long after Michael and I are no longer able to guide it directly. The properties we've improved will continue housing families for generations. The financial literacy programs will continue helping people build genuine security rather than depending on others' generosity or manipulation. Most importantly, the principles Thomas and I discovered throughout our marriage, that patient planning creates more security than aggressive acquisition, that community strength benefits everyone more than individual advantage, that authentic relationships provide more satisfaction than controlling ones, will continue influencing how our foundation operates and how the people we work with approach their own financial and personal decisions. The Victorian house on Maple Grove Lane remains our family's center, but it's no longer the private retreat it was during my years of grief after Thomas's death. It now serves as the foundation's headquarters, with the former dining room converted to a conference space where we meet with partner organizations. The library transformed into a resource center where families can access financial planning, materials and homeownership guidance, and the wraparound porch extended to accommodate the additional foot traffic our programs generate. The house Thomas and I restored together has become what he always envisioned, a place where our values take concrete form, where the care we invested in our home extends outward to benefit our broader community. Victoria's attempt to force me out of this house ultimately led to its transformation into something more valuable than either a private residence or a simple investment property. It became the foundation for systematic community benefit that will continue long after any individual's involvement. This transformation represents the deepest irony of Victoria's attack on our family. Her attempt to steal our security led directly to our creating more security for hundreds of other families. Her efforts to undermine our values resulted in those values being formalized into institutional structures that will perpetuate them indefinitely. Her campaign to force me out of my home led to that home becoming a resource center that helps others establish their own stable housing. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected letter from Victoria that provided a fitting conclusion to our family's story. She had been promoted to director of the Regional Housing Advocacy Coalition where she works, and she wanted to share how our foundation's model had influenced their approach to helping families transition from rental to ownership housing. The Hartwell Foundation's combination of financial sustainability and community benefit has become our template for developing programs that actually work long-term, she wrote. I've spent 3 years studying your model, and I finally understand what you and Thomas built together. Not just individual wealth, but community strength that creates security for everyone involved. Her letter continued with a remarkable admission. I realize now that if I had approached your family with respect instead of manipulation, I could have been part of something genuinely meaningful instead of trying to destroy it for short-term personal gain. The foundation you and Michael created after I left is everything I thought I wanted: financial security, community recognition, and work that makes a real difference. but achieved through building rather than taking. She concluded with a statement that I found both moving and validating. I can't undo the harm I caused, but I can use what I learned from watching your response to my attack to help other families build the kind of authentic security I was too damaged to recognize when I had the chance to be part of it. This perspective from someone who had been our antagonist confirmed what Michael and I had discovered throughout our journey, that genuine security comes from creating value rather than extracting it, from building relationships rather than manipulating them, from patient strategic planning rather than aggressive short-term tactics. As I write these final words in the kitchen where Victoria once screamed, "Get out, this isn't your home anymore," I'm surrounded by evidence of how completely wrong she was about the nature of home and belonging. The foundation's work continues in the converted dining room. Michael's children, my grandchildren, play in the garden Thomas planted, and families throughout our region benefit from the security systems we develop together. True home isn't about who holds the deed or pays the mortgage. It's about who builds something worth preserving, who creates value that extends beyond their individual benefit, who establishes relationships based on mutual respect rather than strategic advantage. By that measure, this house has never been more fully home than it is today, serving as the center for work that embodies everything Thomas and I valued most. The woman who tried to take my home from me ultimately helped me discover its highest purpose, not just as a private refuge for our family, but as a foundation for community strength that will continue long after any individual's involvement. In the end, Victoria's attack led directly to our family's greatest achievement: the transformation of personal security into community benefit, of individual success into collective strength. And in my kitchen each morning, as I review applications from families hoping to achieve the security of home ownership, I feel Thomas's presence in every decision we make to prioritize long-term community benefit over short-term individual gain. The foundation we built together, both literal and institutional, has proven stronger than any attempt to destroy or control it, and will continue growing long after both our voices have joined his in memory. This is how real legacy works. Not through what you accumulate for yourself, but through what you create for others. Not through what you control, but through what you build. Not through fear and manipulation, but through love, patience, and strategic wisdom that creates security for generations. The house is still mine, but more importantly, it's become ours. A community resource that embodies the values Thomas and I discovered together, and will continue serving families long after we're gone. That's the true victory. Not that I kept what was mine, but that our love created something bigger than ourselves. Something no one can ever take away because it belongs to everyone it serves. In this kitchen, in this house, in this community, we've helped build together. I am finally, completely, permanently home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.